Hello everyone, welcome to Say It with Roz. It's been way more than a minute since I've made a video. I've been under the weather for quite a while, and I'm just trying to get over all of this congestion and stuff I've had bothering me. But I did want to recognize today, which is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And I just want to point out some of the things that Dr. King accomplished during his lifetime. Maybe some of these young folks need to hear this because it appears that many of them are not even aware of their history, or what has afforded them the privileges that they do have today. Privileges that right now are really under threat, whether they know it or not. But anyway, I'll just get right into it. Hopefully everyone does know who Dr. Martin Luther King is. I want to start by saying that it really saddens me that Dr. King was assassinated, simply because he was trying to bring about equality for black people, to bring about the ability for black people to just live in peace and be able to work a decent job and earn a decent salary, to get a decent education, to have decent housing, It's just terrible that there were some people back then, and even today, that just don't want to see black people have anything. If they had their druthers, all black people would either be in prison, killed, or sent back to Africa or whatever, something, anything but to let them live in peace and harmony, Not all people. I'm not saying that all white people are like that, because even back then there were whites who were sympathetic to the black cause, and even some of them lost their lives because of that. But getting on to some of the accomplishments that Dr. King made, the first thing I want to mention is his leadership during the boycott of the Montgomery public transportation system, which was brought about when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white person. And she was arrested, because that was against the segregation laws at the time. So anyway, Dr. King, led this boycott where black people boycotted the transportation system for an entire year. They did not ride the bus. Talk about unity. That was real unity back then. And eventually, let's see here. In 1956, because of that boycott, segregation of the public transportation system was done away with. It was decided that it was unconstitutional. So that was one of his accomplishments. Black people no longer had to ride in the back of the bus or give up their seat to a white person, So that was good. That was good. That's how it should be. If a person wants to give up their seat on a bus to someone like an elderly person or a lady or whatever, so be it. Nothing wrong with that. But to be forced to do it by law, that's not right. Dr. King also was known for his nonviolent protests and sit-ins to bring about civil rights for black people. And because of his leadership and other civil rights leaders, the historical March on Washington in 1963 took place, and which was a peaceful demand for civil rights for black people under the law. And during this time is when King gave his famous speech, "I Have a Dream." And because of that march, and because of his efforts and the efforts of other civil rights leaders, Lyndon B. Johnson in 1964 signed the Civil Rights Act. And for those who don't know, Lyndon B. Johnson was a Democrat. So black people who have been saying that Democrats have never done anything for them are misinformed, or they don't know their history, because a Democrat signed the Civil Rights Act, which meant that black people had the right to go about their business and be treated, with dignity. You didn't have these colored only and white only signs, and you couldn't just take the lives of black people for no darn reason just because they were black, The Civil Rights Act gave us, by law, the right to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in this country. Okay? And in 1965, King led a drive to register black people to vote, to get more black people to vote and to encourage black people to register to vote. And let's see here. Let me look at my notes here. And to stop, people who didn't want black people to vote, stop doing all of these crazy things to keep black people from voting. Threats, I'm sure, and all of these crazy laws and poll tax and requiring them to answer certain questions and whatever, he marched against that. And it didn't happen immediately because in 1965, King organized an initial, I'm going to read this, organized an initial march from Selma to the State Capitol building in Montgomery, but did not lead it himself. The marchers were violently turned back by state troopers who used nightsticks and tear gas, and I'm sure any other thing that they could use, against these peaceful protesters who were just marching. More than 50 marchers, including civil rights leader John Lewis, were hospitalized. This incident took place on Sunday, March 7th in 1965, which became known as Bloody Sunday. So you can imagine what that means. These people were beaten, dogs sicked on them, nightsticks, tear gas. I've seen footage of where protesters were sprayed with fire hydrants, just all manner of violence against a peaceful group of people who just wanted civil rights, the right to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in this country. Okay, so they were turned around. Then King led a second march 2 days later, despite a restraining order by a federal court. Heading a procession of over 2,000 marchers, black and white, King set out across Edmund Pettus Bridge outside Selma until the group came to a barricade of state troopers. But instead of going on and forcing a confrontation, he led his followers to kneel and pray, and then they turned around and went back. Now this brought on a lot of criticism from some of the more radical, black leaders during that time. They thought he should have pressed on and forced the confrontation, but he didn't do that. King's whole thing was to be peaceful. And I think it was the right thing, because if they had been confrontational and had fought, it would have given these hateful people an excuse to kill them. It would have. It would have been massacre. So I think because they were peaceful, it forced people to look at who are really the violent people here. Who are really the savages here, that they would harm peaceful people who were not lifting not one finger against them. He did the right thing, in my opinion. It forced some people to look in the mirror, people who had a conscience. Because some of those folks didn't have a conscience, just like some of them don't today. And because of that, in 1965, the Voting Rights Act was signed. So his peaceful protests brought about the Voting Rights Act, which by law gave black people the right and freedom to vote. That doesn't mean that people still didn't try to keep them from voting. I don't know if any of you know that God, what's the man's name that was gunned down in his driveway? Medgar Evers, for simply trying to get black people registered to vote. That's how much, what kind of hatred is that? They didn't want black people to vote because they knew black people would not vote against their own interests. That they would not vote for these hateful people, to be in control of their lives. They wanted things to stay as they were, where they could do whatever they wanted to do. you know, do whatever they wanted to do to black people, you know. And there are still people today with that mentality. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I don't understand that kind of hatred. Black people as a whole are not trying to harm anyone. They're not spending their days plotting against white people, trying to hold white people down, trying to take what white people have. No. Black people just want the right to live, to earn a living, to live in peace. Then, unfortunately, now those are two of the major things that Martin Luther King helped bring about. In 1967, I'm going to read this. King later shifted his focus to economic justice, speaking out against poverty and war. In 1967, to bring attention to the issue of poverty and its relationship to urban violence, he helped plan a Poor People's March on Washington. In the spring of 1968, before the march was scheduled, to take place, King made a trip to Memphis, Tennessee, to support a strike by the city's sanitation workers. And on April the 4th, while standing on the second floor balcony of the motel where he was staying, he was shot and killed by a sniper. The cruelty, the hate of some people is just unbelievable. King's death shocked the country. He was buried in Southview Cemetery in Atlanta. King's remains were later transferred to a tomb on the grounds of the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change, the King Center, adjacent to the Ebenezer Baptist Church. His new tomb bears the same epitaph as that of his original gravestone. Free at last. Free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. What a terrible price to pay for freedom. King's career greatly advanced the cause of civil rights in the United States. His energetic personality and persuasive oratory helped unite many blacks in a search for peaceful solutions to racial oppression. In 1977, he was posthumously awarded with the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his battle against prejudice. In 1983, the U.S. Congress established a national holiday, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, in his honor, to be celebrated annually on the third Monday in January. A national memorial opened in Washington, D.C. in 2011. And I did have the opportunity to visit that memorial in Washington. Thanks to my dear sister Bobby Lloyd, who invited me to go along on a trip to Washington with her, and we did visit that memorial. The Fair Housing Act was also something that was influenced by Dr. King. It was first put before Congress in 1966, primarily to address issues of racial discrimination in the rental and sales of housing. Over the next 2 years, members of the House of Representatives and Senate considered the bill several times, but on each occasion it failed to gain the necessary support for passage. Nothing that black people have gained in this country has been easy. Nothing. One of the bill's strongest supporters was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who had been at the forefront of the open housing marches in Chicago in the 1960s. After King was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, President Lyndon B. Johnson, who was a Democrat, black people, encouraged Congress to pass the bill as a memorial to the slain civil rights leader before King's funeral. At the same time, pressure to pass the bill was also being put on the federal government by such organizations as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the American GI Forum, and the National Committee Against Discrimination in Housing. Those groups, as well as others, were outraged that the families of African American soldiers who had been killed in Vietnam were facing discrimination in matters related to housing. It just doesn't matter to some what black people do. We can fight for this country, we can die for this country, and they still look down on us as if we're nothing. Okay. In the U.S. Congress, Republican Senator Edward Brooke of Massachusetts, the first African American senator since Reconstruction, and Democratic Senator Edward Kennedy, also of Massachusetts, were passionate supporters of the bill. On April 11, in 1968, 7 days after King's assassination, Congress finally passed the Fair Housing Act. Lord have mercy. And do you know that there were black people during this past election who were running around saying Democrats had never done anything for them? Lyndon B. Johnson was a Democrat, people. And for whatever reason, he saw fit to try to bring about equality for black people in this country. And a lot of that thanks goes to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. because of his persistence, his nonviolent protest. It makes me sad that he was assassinated. It really does. And to think that there are still people today in this country who still harbor that kind of hatred in their hearts for black people. For what? Black people have given so much to this country. We were forced to come here to work as slaves. And even though we were doing all of the work for white people, some of them were so mean, to the slaves. They took so many lives. It just makes me wonder how people with that kind of mentality could even think that they are superior to anyone, to anything. And today, they don't even want us talking about slavery or talking about black history or talking about the things that happened to us. Yet, there are people today that are proud of what was done to us. They're happy about it. Look what happened directly after this election in 2024 in November. Black people received text messages on their phones telling them that they had been selected to report to duty on the plantation to pick cotton. These people thought that was funny. They enjoyed it. They enjoyed doing that. There's still a lot of hate in this country that I don't understand. I just don't understand it. It would be so much better if people just lived and let live. I know I've never done anything to white people. I have worked all of my life. I've never been on, not downing people that need welfare. Some people actually need it. But I'm so glad that I never felt the need or the want to be on welfare. I have worked all of my life. No one has ever given me squat. I worked on a job. I worked for probably 40 years. I worked on my last job for 30 years. I was a good employee. If I hadn't been, I would have been fired or laid off. We had multiple layoffs at that company. I was never laid off. I was a good employee. I gave 100% to my employer. They didn't give me 100% though, because I was black. But I never played the race card. I never went to HR and accused them of racism. And I never slacked on my job. That's one thing that can never be taken away from me. That can never be said about me, that I didn't do a good job. And people that are against DEI and affirmative action programs like that, they act like employers were just hiring anybody off the street that weren't even qualified. You had to be qualified, baby. You didn't sit your ass on a job and not be qualified. Those programs were put in. It's sad that they had to be put in place, but they were put into place just to give black people a chance. And it wasn't a whole lot of them. Certain jobs, you didn't see very many black people. There were not very many black people in the corporate scene that I was in. One here and there. And believe me, if you didn't give 100% or more, you'd be out the door. So nobody gives anybody shit. You know what I'm saying? It just makes me very angry. All I hear is DEI, 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 you know. As if that's a bad thing. It's bad because it even has to be in place. But anyway, I don't want to get off onto that. This is really a tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King, who did a lot for black people. And I'm not so sure that all black people realize that. Some black people don't even know what's going on. But I want to thank Dr. Martin Luther King for his sacrifice, for what he did. He didn't have to do any of that. He was a very educated man, very smart. He grew up in a home, from what I read, both of his parents were educated, and he himself was an educated man. And I want to encourage more of my black people to educate yourselves. Educate yourselves. Do all you can to help your children in school to learn, to be good students, to go to college. I know college is very expensive these days, but there are ways to not be bound by student loans. I have a sister who put her two children through college on scholarships. And she actually has a program where she helps people to navigate that journey to find scholarships, you know, to pay for their children's college. As a matter of fact, I'll put a link in this video where she can be reached. Neither one of her daughters had a student loan debt. They are now educated, good jobs. It can be done, people. Don't be ignorant. Don't listen to mess that you hear out here on YouTube by some of these deceivers who do not have your best interests at heart. The very ones that were telling you Democrats had never done anything for you, they're liars. And I would not be shocked if they were getting paid to deceive you. Educate yourself. There is no excuse for being misinformed or not informed or not knowing what's going on. Anything you want to know about is out there on that internet. Anything. All of the things they were telling you, things out of context. That's another story. I'm not even going to go there. But educate yourselves. Educate yourself. There's no excuse. If you are too lazy and too ignorant to find out things for yourself, then you deserve what you get. You deserve what you get. But anyway, thank you, Dr. Martin Luther King, for all that you did for my people. And for all people, really. Because the Civil Rights Act didn't just help black people. It also helped women. I just regret that he wasn't allowed to live. And I regret that there's no one else that I have seen in my lifetime that had the guts to stand up for what's right in such a manner as he did. I don't see unity among black people anymore. I don't. So many will sell out their own people, for a few dollars. Sad. I know Dr. King would be saddened by some of the things that black people do today. But I thank God for those who have a mind. For those who are intelligent enough to find out things for themselves, to educate themselves, to see what's really going on. Yes. That's about it. There are other things that Dr. King did, I'm sure, but I just wanted to point out those major things. And I'm going to show some clips of some of the things that were going on back in that day, how things were. A lot of these young people, they don't even realize what they have not been subjected to because of what people like Dr. Martin Luther King did and other civil rights leaders. He wasn't the only one. They don't know. They don't know what my people went through. I was born in 1950. I'm 74 years old. So I have seen the Jim Crow era. I have seen the colored only and white only signs. I have experienced not being able to go through the front door of a movie house to watch a movie. I had to go around the side of the building and walk up to some stairs and go into the balcony where the black folks were allowed to sit. Yes. Yes, indeed. They don't know. And they take this freedom, this fragile freedom that they have today for granted. It could all be taken away, people. There are people right now who want to take all of that away from you. They don't want you to be able to live in a decent house. They don't want you to be able to go into any restaurant that you want to and sit down and have a peaceful meal. They don't want you sitting on the first floor of a movie house. They don't want you drinking out of the same fountain that white people drink out of. They still exist today, people. And I'm sure they're doing everything they can to take us back to those horrible times. They would love to see us out in the cotton fields, although they've got cotton picking machines now. Hell, they'd probably get rid of them, and they'd love to see black folks out there picking cotton. And being able to knock them upside their head just because they want to. Why? 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 Anyway, Lord, I'm making myself sad. I want to wish everyone a bittersweet Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Thank you, Dr. King. Thank you.